So Rob, I'm going to unlock the hive. I keep them locked just to keep people out who may be inquisitive. It's much easier to do before I put my gloves on. So now before I open up, I'm going to make sure I'm protected. The bees this morning, although it's just turned 8 o'clock, are really productive. They're going in and out with pollen. There's 1 or 2 wasps around, which is slightly worrying. I'll put some wasp traps out later.
Can you tell me about this hive, Jim?
Yeah, the hive is referred to as a top bar hive, and the reason for that will become evident when I take the roof off. So if I do that now, the bees will form their comb on these bars, which are referred to as top bars, and they will build their comb off there. And we're going to take one out, or take a few out, just to have a look at what they've done. And the reason for me going in to have a look is to just check that the queen's in there, she's laying eggs, and there's larvae, which is evident. I'm slightly concerned by a couple of wasps I've seen around, but the amount of activity of bees going in and out tells me really that everything is fine in here. They're bringing in pollen, and they just seem happy. You know, I've taken the lid off. They're not worrying me. They're just getting on with what they've got to do. So the tools which I use are really just a hive tool to prise apart these bars, because they will propolize them, and they've really propolised on this end a lot. So I'll see if I can get some out. All this brown stuff is the propolis, and it's basically just tree resin which they've mixed in with some of their own enzymes, and it's a really good product. It's been used for hundreds of years to treat sore throats and other ailments. This hive is full end to end, and it's already, I've taken 2 lots of bees out of here to start other hives in other places, and it is still full. You can just see them here crawling out. I'm going to struggle to get a bar out. So much honey in here. I can't go into that end, Rob. It's the comb is breaking. So let me see if I can go into the other end. So there we have some comb that is just dripping with honey. That is incredibly healthy. All that capped honey they've gone out and gathered and brought back. And that's all we have on there. And the next one in, I can see, is just the same. As I get further in looking for their brood, the bees will get a bit more excited by my presence, I would imagine. But that, again, is just full of honey. So I'm looking for just generally the good health of the hive. It smells absolutely delicious. They've got so much stores that they've got plenty to be getting through winter. My problem is that they've built comb down where they probably shouldn't have built comb, and I'm going to have difficulty getting. Oh, there's just here are some some eggs which have been laid, grown into larvae, and then capped for male bees, for drones. So they're just there. But the hive is so full, they have just kept producing more and more honey, that they're building comb now almost anywhere just to put some more stores in.
So in order to manage this, what will be your moves now?
I'm going to leave them to do that, because they know what they need to do. But as the bees will die off in September, and the hive will reduce in size, then I'll come and do a bit of tidying up of the comb. But right now, I don't want to go any further into here because I think I'm going to damage their stores. I'll just have a very quick look to see if I can see anything here. We might be able to pull it back. No, I'm damaging. Well, will that come out? No, they've got so much stores in here that I don't want to go any further. But we can have a look in the other hive and see if there's a bit more of interest in there. I'm going to let the bees overwinter on their own honey. So at the moment they're really busy producing all of this which they want to use over winter, and they think even further ahead. So they're thinking, well, maybe next year won't be so good because last year wasn't very good. And they're always thinking ahead of what they need. So I'm very reluctant always to take too much honey. I generally think that if they've overwintered on their honey and they have some left round about March, when the nectar flow is beginning to happen again, then I can take some honey at that point. This year, it was really ambiguous when the nectar flow started because everything was sort of 3 or 4 weeks behind. So they were very slow, but this hive again had so much stores that I took a bit. And then all I do is take that comb and either eat it on the wax, and I mean, just looking at that, to me that looks delicious. Or I scrunch it up, put it in a sieve and drain it into a bowl overnight, and that would make about 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds of honey on that bar. But that's why it's called the top bar hive, to go back to that very original question. Everything hangs off of these bars, and it's just simplicity itself.
And why does that differ from the more traditional beehives?
Well, in a few ways really. The bees have drawn out that comb all themselves. And in a traditional beehive, it would be usual to put in something called some foundation wax, which is predetermined cell size. And the bees will then draw out on that pattern on that foundation, whereas the bees here will make all their own comb to the size which they want. So it's just like they're in a wild, and the original design for this hive came out of Africa, where a couple of Canadian guys in the 50s were out in Kenya, and they saw bees populating fallen logs. And this essentially is just to replicate that fallen log. They've got an entrance. The entrance here I've modified so that they have to come in here, they crawl up this bit here, and then they get into the hive at the top. So a bit like a periscope. And what that does, that gives the bees a larger area to defend. So with those wasps I saw buzzing around earlier, they will be able to keep the wasps out, partly because they're so strong. It's such a strong colony. But it means the guard bees, the bees which are checking on what is coming into the hive, whether it be wasps, hornets or other bees, they'll only let in what smells right, what's got the same pheromones as this hive.
So they wouldn't recognise another bee from another colony?
So if a bee from that hive tried to come in, it would be smelling like that hive, and each hive has its own unique smell. So the guard bees here will have a sniff on every bee that comes in. If it's not smelling right, it gets sent away. The other job for the guard bees is in this hive, which will probably have 55,000 bees in. It's so full from wall to wall. There'll be maybe 5,000 male bees, and the rest will all be workers, female bees. When we get to September, the male bees aren't wanted in the hive anymore. They're only, or their main role and known role in life is to mate with the queen. All that will be done. So the worker bees don't want them in here just eating all their stores over winter. So the guard bees, come September, will not let them back in once they've gone for their afternoon flight. And you can watch here at the entrance as the drones, which are a bit fatter and more rounded backs than the workers, will be trying to get in, and the guard bees are just pushing them out, and eventually they fall to the ground exhausted. It's a hard life being a male bee actually, because their one role in life is to mate with the queen, and that process kills them as well. So the rest of the time they're just walking around the hive eating honey, so a lot of their life is very good.
And what's the average life of the bees?
Well, these workers here in summer will live for 6 weeks. So for the first 3 weeks of their life, they will do all inside jobs. Once they're born, they'll start cleaning out the comb. Then they'll start feeding other bees and nurturing other bees which are just born. They might take on some nurse duties for the queen. They'll be feeding the queen. Undertaker bees, there are bees which are taking out any dead, because the bees which are outside will always try and die outside, but there will be some bees which die inside. And I've watched bees, they get hold of a dead bee in its jaws, crawl up and fly out and drop it maybe 10 feet away. Absolutely marvellous. And then after 3 weeks of household duties, they'll start to move outside. So their first job then might be as a guard bee, and then once it's done a bit of guard duty, its final job is probably foraging. So it needs to go and find some food, and it needs to know how to get back. So it will do its orientation dance outside the hive, which is sort of a figure of 8 kind of thing outside. And then it can go up to 3 miles away, and it comes back to this precise spot. Its navigation is fantastic. And these foraging bees, they'll go out, they'll find a field of very good food, and they'll come back and want to tell the rest of the bees where that is. So they'll come in and they'll do a waggle dance on the comb. And this waggle dance has been interpreted by some very patient people who have done lots of experiments. And the way that they dance and the vigorousness of their dance will tell the other bees how far away and what direction to go. And it's just incredibly complex and clever, because the sun is part of that navigation process, and in the time it's taken them to get back from that good forage to the hive, the sun will have moved. So they will know how far that has moved, and they will adjust their dance accordingly. Absolutely amazing. And then at the end of their foraging life, they will die. But come September, some of the bees which are being born then will overwinter with the queen. So I would think this hive will probably shrink down to about 20,000 bees over winter. And the main purpose of the bees then is just to keep the queen warm. So they'll just form a ball around the queen, keep feeding her from all these reserves they've built up, keep feeding themselves, and the bees which are around the queen will vibrate their wings sufficiently to keep a constant temperature around the queen. And as they begin to lose energy, they will move to the outside of the clump, go and get some food, and the ones which are next to them will take over the vibration duties. And that process will just keep going all the way through winter until she starts laying again in the new year.
What's the queen's life?
The queen, she can live for up to 5 years, but she may begin to lose potency after 3 years. Then all the decisions in the hive are made collectively by this superorganism. They will all take part in the decision-making process. And they might think that the queen needs replacing, so they'll bring on a new queen and get rid of the old queen. It's unlikely that this hive would have a queen for 5 years, because this hive it's surprising that it hasn't swarmed already. With this number of bees, they should be thinking of swarming. But the year has been a bit topsy-turvy because of the very slow start to the nectar flowing. So I think they're not quite on the ball. I would have expected to see more drone cells in there, because they build on more. They get more drones being born when they're about to swarm, and they bring on more queens. Because what will happen when they swarm is that the old queen that is in here will go off with maybe 5,000 bees, 6,000 bees, and they'll clump up. And when this hive has swarmed before, they've only gone about 30 feet and clumped onto a tree. And then the bees that were foragers will become scouts, and they will go off looking for a new home for this swarm. And there may be 100 scouts going off to different places looking for a nice new home. And they have to somehow convince the other scouts that the home that they found is best. And they do that again by a dance. And they'll tell these other scouts, come and have a look what I found. I found this really nice place. And the more vigorous their dance, the more likely they are to win over some other scouts. Other scouts will go and then very slowly they might have 3 or 4 who think that's quite nice, and there might be another scout who's found something good, and they may be able to convince 5 or 6 other bees, and slowly all the 100 or so scouts that are out there will move into this a camp which is saying this one is better or this one is better, until eventually they all decide that one home is the best home for them to go to. And then the scouts will fly up high, and this clump of bees will take off and follow them to the new home. In terms of collective decision making, I think they could probably teach us quite a bit, really. But again, they're just really clever when they're looking for their new homes. They measure it for size, because they know that they need a minimum size to get enough stores and enough comb in there to lay their eggs. They need a certain size to be able to get through winter. So if the home isn't big enough, they'll move on to the next one. And they walk around it in all directions, measuring how big it is. It's just so complex, the calculations they must be able to do.
And in terms of human interventions, for example, if you're called and someone tells you, I've got a clump of bees, what would you facilitate in that regard?
Well, when I've collected a swarm from here, it has been very simple because the trees aren't very tall. The clump is very safe because when they go, they fill themselves up with honey because they don't know how long their journey is going to be before they can get some more food. So they fill their honey stomachs up and they set off, and their first port of call is a tree nearby while the scouts are looking. While they're in that state, all I need to do is come along and try and get the centre of that clump into a box. If I do that, that means the queen is in there. The bees are all crowding around the queen. They don't want her to get cold or anything, so they're all around her. I put the box on the ground, and all the bees which I haven't managed to get into the box are flying around, and slowly, maybe over 15-20 minutes, they all migrate down into that box because the pheromones are coming out of there and they're just channeling down into there. And after 20 minutes, there's not a bee left flying. They're all in the box. I just come along, close the lid up, tape it up, and go and put it in another hive somewhere. And it looks like I'm a magician, that I know exactly what I'm doing. All the work is done by the bees. I mean, I've done it here, and it draws people in. They're attracted to it. So I've had sort of people standing. And when I come and tape the box up, I've had a round of applause. It's like I'm the one that's doing it all. I'm doing nothing. The bees are just fantastic. Of course, I've had other ones over there. They've gone a bit further onto a tree, which is high up, and I've had to get the ladder out and cut a branch, shake the bees into a box. But the same thing happens. They just migrate into the box. They just want to follow their queen. The queen is the all-important person because without the queen, they've got no eggs. But they are clever enough that if the queen dies for whatever reason, and they have eggs in here, they will pick an egg to feed royal jelly throughout its life, and that will turn into a queen. A regular worker egg can be turned into a queen. So if they don't have any emergency queen cells in process, they still have the ability to do that. So it's very rare for them to go queenless. Should we have a look in the other hive? So the first thing I'm looking for actually is where is the end of the hive. So the end of the hive is defined by something called a follower board, and it's there. So I can safely take out these. Oh, look. Got a bumblebee that's crawled into the roof space and died. Oh.
What's the difference between bumblebees and these bees?
Well, bumblebees are much more solitary. They do live in small colonies, and there's a huge amount of variety of bumblebees. I don't know that much about bumblebees, other than tree bees. Tree bumblebees have moved in through the continent and moving up through England, and they're not pushing out any of our native species. But everyone who tells me they see bees then tell me that they're tree bees, and they have a habit of nesting in bird boxes.
Do they produce honey?
Only they don't produce stores of honey. They gather nectar for their immediate use, but they don't store it in the way that a colony of bees will. So a colony of bumblebees, there's lots of different bumblebees. Some are solitary bees, so they only worry about themselves. But some bumblebees will be in small colonies, but probably only with about 50 bees. And they don't gather pollen and nectar to overwinter. I've got a tray of which I put some food in for them recently. Well, what we have on here, Rob, is particularly on that side, we have some brood through here of young bees waiting to be born. And actually, where I've pulled the comb out, you can see the young grubs here. So all of these cells are bees waiting to be born. And they're all worker bees. And in these other ones, I don't know how close up you can get, but they're very hard to see. But there are tiny, tiny eggs. And they're just as small as a pinhead, smaller than a pinhead. And when I look, I can just see a whole pattern of eggs in there. So in 2 or 3 days, they will have grown into larvae, and then they'll get capped, and then they'll hatch 3 weeks later. But this hive had gone queenless, and I got a queen, a British black bee queen, and put in, because there were still a lot of worker bees in here, and she has obviously started laying, because this is what I wanted to see. I wanted to see that there was some eggs, and that there was some larvae and some capped brood. If I see that, then I know the queen is okay. So just looking in here, I can see that everything is absolutely fine. The bees are generally happy. They've got everything they need. They don't have a huge amount of stores because they've got to start building up again. But there is on here quite a lot. You can see the honey glistening in here, and they're beginning to cap it. So they've got some stores. I'm going to have a look in from the other end. There's a little plug of pollen that has fallen out of one of the cells, and it's got all these different stratas of things they found. So some sort of very deep yellow, some sort of whitish grey. There's a bit of very, very bright orangey yellow there.